She was dragged through the town square for being infertile until the mountain man cut the rope. Dry Gulch, Wyoming Territory, late 1878. The sun hung low behind the jagged ridge, bleeding orange light across the dust-choked town square. Dry Gulch was a place where the wind scraped harder than the law, where women lived like property and men strutted like tyrants. By late afternoon, townsfolk always gathered at the square. Gamblers leaning on porch rails, ranch hands spitting tobacco, women clutching shawls tight to their shoulders so their eyes could watch without seeming to. That was the stage on which the cruelty unfolded. Maribel Carter, only 24, small-framed, dark-eyed, and quiet-spoken, stood in the center of it all with her wrists bound in coarse rope. Dust clung to her dress, hair tangled around her cheeks. Her husband, Hank Tolliver, towered beside her, drunk on his own authority and the murmurs of the crowd. An infertile wife, he sneered, gripping the rope that tied her to the saddle of his buckskin mare. A curse on a man's house. Might as well give folks a show, if she cannot give me a son. Maribel shut her eyes as laughter rippled through the square. She had never told anyone the truth, that long ago, a childhood accident had shattered something deep inside her, leaving scars that could never be seen. She carried that secret like a brand, terrified Hank would abandon her if he ever learned. She had not imagined he would do something worse. Hank flicked the reins. "Walk, girl," he said, "or let the horse do it for you." The mare stepped forward, jerking the rope tight. Maribel stumbled, then she fell. The crowd gasped as her knees scraped against the ground, dust rising around her like smoke. Hank's grin widened. "That is what a barren wife looks like," he boomed. "Drag her. Let folks see." The mare began moving, steady and unbothered, pulling Maribel across the packed earth. Her dress tore, her palms shredded as she fought to lift herself. Boots and skirts shuffled back to clear a path. Some townsfolk covered their mouths, while others watched with morbid fascination. A little boy whispered, "Mama, why is she being dragged?" The woman tugged him close. "Hush now, look away." But the spectacle did not end there. From the road leading down the mountain ridge, a lone rider entered the square. His horse was a vast gray with a thick winter coat, and the man on its back looked carved from the wilderness itself. Elias Thorne, mountain man, trapper, hunter, rarely descended from his solitary life. When he did, Dry Gulch usually pretended not to notice him. Today, no one could ignore the way he reined in his horse the instant he saw Maribel being dragged. His eyes darkened, his jaw set. He slid off his saddle before the dust even settled around his boots. Maribel heard footsteps, heavy, sure, and tried to lift her head. The light wavered behind her watering eyes. When the shadow of a man fell over her, she flinched, expecting Hank. Instead, a calm voice rumbled above her. "Hold still, man." Before Hank or the crowd could process what was happening, Elias strode forward, axe already in hand. In one swift, practiced movement, he swung the blade downward. The steel bit through rope with a crack sharp as gunfire. The rope snapped. The mare jolted. The dragging stopped. Silence swallowed the square. Hank's face twisted, red with fury. "What in hell do you think you're doing?" Elias did not answer. He crouched beside Maribel, bracing one steady arm beneath her shoulders so she could sit up without scraping herself further. He did not ogle her, did not touch her more than necessary. Every move respectful, careful, deliberate. When he stood and faced Hank, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. "No woman deserves to be dragged like an animal," Elias said, voice low but cutting as a cold wind. "Not yours, not anyone's." A murmur spread through the onlookers. Hank blinked, as though he had been struck. His hand drifted toward his holster, but Elias stepped between him and Maribel, broad shoulders blocking her from view. The mountain man's expression did not change, yet something in his stance warned the whole square that a line had been crossed, one he would not allow crossed again. Maribel, trembling and bruised, watched the man who had appeared from nowhere, the man who had cut her free when no one else dared. Dry Gulch had seen many cruel things, but that evening For the first time in a long while, it saw something else. A single act of defiance, quiet, steady, and strong enough to stop a town in its tracks. The dust was still settling when Elias knelt beside her. Maribel lay curled on her side, hands scraped, lip bleeding, the edge of her dress torn where the rope had dragged her across the square. She expected roughness, but what came was something else entirely. Elias moved with quiet precision, not a word wasted, not a touch uninvited. He didn't speak as he slipped off his heavy wool coat and gently draped it around her shoulders. Then, without crowding her, he examined her wrists, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they checked for broken bones. "You're lucky," he said softly. "No fracture, just bruising." Maribel flinched at the sound of his voice, her face half buried in the crook of her arm. She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. Shame burned hotter than the welts on her skin. "I'm fine," she whispered hoarsely. "You're not," Elias said, "but you will be." Hank Tolliver was not finished. He stormed toward them, red-faced, spitting rage. "You think this is over?" he barked. "You just cut my wife loose in front of the whole damn town." Elias rose slowly, positioning himself between Hank and Maribel without fanfare. His posture wasn't aggressive, it was final, like a tree that wouldn't move, no matter how hard the wind howled. "You lay hands on her again," Elias said, calm as still water. "You'll answer to me." Hank reached for his belt. "I could put a bullet in you right now." Elias didn't flinch. "If you want to shoot me, make peace with God first." That silenced Hank, just for a moment. Then he spat on the ground and turned, pushing through the gathering crowd. Whispers flared. Women clutched their shawls tighter, muttering to each other. Some looked at Maribel with something close to sympathy. Others shook their heads, already retreating into the safe shadows of tradition. The men were louder. "A woman like that ain't worth defending," one muttered. "Can't birth a child, can't keep a home," said another. "She should be grateful he didn't sell her off." Maribel heard every word, and still, she didn't look up. Elias leaned close. "Can you stand?" She nodded, barely. He extended a hand, waiting. No pressure, no force. When she finally placed her trembling palm in his, he helped her up without a grunt of effort. As they passed through the onlookers, Elias lifted his other hand, not to threaten, but to shield her face from the gawking stares. It was a quiet gesture, unnoticed by most, but to Maribel, it felt like the first kindness she'd received in years. They reached the town's small infirmary, a single-room building with a chipped sign and a shuttered porch. Elias nudged the door open with his boot and guided her inside, careful not to jostle her injury. "You shouldn't have done that," Maribel whispered. "You shouldn't get involved." Elias looked at her, steady and clear. "I already am." She sat on the edge of the cot, not touching the blanket beneath her. Her fingers twisted in her lap, skin blotched with dirt and bruises. "He'll come for me tonight," she said. "He always does when I make him look weak." Elias didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, truly looked, not at her torn dress, not at the swelling on her cheek, but at the hurt she tried to hide, the deep kind that doesn't bleed. "You're not going back there," he said finally. Her eyes lifted, startled. "I have nowhere else." "You do now." Silence fell between them, taut and uncertain, but beneath it, something else lingered, thin and trembling, like the start of a bridge across a canyon. He turned toward the door, keeping his voice low. "You rest, I'll keep watch." Maribel stared after him, still wrapped in his coat. She didn't know who he was, or why he'd come down from the mountain today of all days. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like prey. She felt seen. The wind had changed. Elias could feel it, the way seasoned men do before storms or gunfire. He moved quickly, silently, packing only what was needed. A canteen, a flint kit, dried meat, one rifle, 2 blankets, no time for more. Maribel stood near the doorway of the infirmary, clutching the coat he had given her like it was armor. Her lip was still swollen, one eye nearly closed, but she didn't look afraid. She looked ready. He handed her a heavy fur cloak, his own. "It's going to get cold, where we're going." She hesitated before taking it. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." They rode out just before midnight. No words passed between them as they slipped through the narrow alleys of Dry Gulch. Every creak of saddle leather felt too loud, every hoofbeat a warning. Behind them, the town held its breath. Then came the sound of chaos. Hank Tolliver's voice ripped through the stillness like a whip. "She's mine. Anyone hiding her will hang for it." Torches lit the square. His men were armed, drunk, furious. They rode in packs, kicking down doors, threatening townsfolk, shouting accusations. The town became a fever dream, glowing with firelight, echoing with fear. Women locked their children inside. Men stood on porches with rifles, unsure where to aim. Elias and Maribel took the narrow trail toward the river bend. It was rough terrain, but quieter than the main road. Elias had scouted it many times before. Suddenly, hoofbeats. "Close, too close." "Down," Elias whispered. Maribel froze. He leaned back and gently pulled her against him. "Lay flat, here, on my back. Cover the saddle. Breathe slow." She hesitated only a second, then obeyed, curling her body over his back, her hands gripping his sides. He felt her breath, fast and uneven, pressing through the layers of coat and shirt. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder, then passed, missed them by yards. They stayed that way a long while, her breath warming the back of his neck, his hand still lightly holding the reins. When it was safe, he nudged the horse forward. "They'll sweep south next. We keep high." She didn't answer. Her voice had tightened somewhere in her throat. By dawn, they found a narrow cleft in the rock, a place Elias had used once in winter, long ago. The stones curled around them like ribs, shelter, barely. He built a fire from twigs and dry moss. She sat near it, silent, exhausted. He unrolled a blanket, placing it between them. "I won't sleep," he said. "But you should." Maribel shook her head. "I can't." Still, she leaned back against the wall. Elias sat opposite her, sharpening his blade with slow, measured strokes. Minutes passed. Then, "Do you want to know the truth?" she asked. His eyes lifted. He said nothing, just nodded once. "My mother dropped me when I was 7. There was bleeding inside. They said I'd live, but something was damaged. I never told Hank. He wanted sons. I thought if I just prayed hard enough." She swallowed. "I thought I could fix myself." Elias set the blade down gently. "Infertility is not a crime." Her lips parted. "It shouldn't be a curse either," he added. Maribel stared at him, and suddenly her face crumpled, not with weakness, but with years of silent ache finally cracking open. Elias didn't move. He didn't reach for her, but his presence, solid, still, safe, was enough. She wiped her own tears. "Why are you helping me?" He met her eyes across the fire. "Because someone should have, a long time ago." The trail grew steeper as Elias guided the horse higher into the pines. Dawn broke pale and cold over the ridge, and with it came a hush. No torches, no hoofbeats, only the sound of wind in the trees. The cabin appeared like a shadow at the edge of a clearing. It was small but sturdy, built from thick cedar logs, chimney already puffing faint smoke from when Elias had ridden ahead last week to stock firewood. He helped Maribel down without a word. Inside, the space was spare but warm, a wide hearth, 2 chairs, a cot near the fire, shelves lined with tools, herbs, jars of dried meat, clean, lived in, safe. Elias lit the lamp and handed her a wool blanket from a chest near the wall. Then he disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he was holding a pair of worn leather shoes, the soles nearly torn through. "These are yours," he said simply, "if you want them." He sat by the fire and began sewing quietly, working a new layer of deer hide into her old soles. His hands were quick, practiced. He didn't look at her, only focused on the task. Maribel stood watching, unsure whether to sit or cry. When she finally did sit, he didn't move closer, didn't ask her anything. Instead, he got up, pinned an extra blanket to the rafters near the hearth to cut the draft, and laid down a second pelt for her to sleep on. Later, he handed her a knife, small but sharp. "I won't need this," she said. "It's not for me," Elias replied. "It's for you, if it helps you feel safe." He said it without hesitation, without irony, then turned away to tend to the kettle. Maribel stared at the blade for a long time before setting it beside her cot. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay beneath the thick blankets, listening to the fire crackle, and Elias shift occasionally on the floor across the room. He didn't snore, he didn't speak, but he stayed. Days passed. She cleaned the cabin when he was out hunting, cooked when he brought back rabbit or grouse. He gave her space, but not absence. He taught her how to tie knots, how to trap snowmelt for drinking water. He never touched her, never asked anything of her. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Elias was sharpening his axe when Maribel broke the silence. "You don't talk much," she said, not unkindly. "No need to fill space that isn't empty," he replied. She smiled, faintly. Later, while gathering kindling, she asked, "Why do you hate Dry Gulch so much?" He paused. "My sister," he said at last. Her name was Ruth. Maribel waited. She was promised to a man who owned half the mines. He beat her. No one did anything. Sheriff said she must have provoked him. "Ruth died the second winter after I left. I was too late." Silence stretched like a thread between them. Maribel's voice came small. "Then, you know." He nodded. "Enough to know people don't always get what they deserve, but they should." The next morning, fresh snow had fallen. Elias brought in chopped wood, his boots caked in frost. He paused by the doorway, eyes narrowing. Tracks, hoof prints, multiple horses. Not fresh, but not old either. He didn't say anything at first. Maribel saw the change in his face. "What is it?" He grabbed the rifle, checked its chamber. "They're coming." "Who?" He looked at her fully for the first time that morning. "Hank." Elias left early that morning, bow slung across his shoulder, boots already caked in ice by the time he disappeared into the woods. The snow had fallen quiet overnight, smoothing out the chaos of days before. Maribel stayed behind in the cabin, her ribs still sore, but her mind sharper than ever. She moved slowly, tidying up the dishes, folding the blankets, checking the kettle. But when she noticed Elias's coat tossed over the chair, something drew her to it. She wasn't sure why she reached inside the inner pocket. Maybe she expected flint or a scrap of jerky. What she found was a charm, hand-sewn from faded blue cloth, a tiny bundle wrapped in thread, the edge embroidered with one single letter, R. Maribel's breath caught. She knew that cloth. When she was young, her father had done business with the miners near Dry Gulch. She remembered a girl who visited once, kind-eyed and quiet. The girl had worn a ribbon just like this, said it was made by her mother. Her name was Ruth. The charm trembled in Maribel's fingers. She stared at the small stitching, memories colliding in her chest like storm winds. Elias returned near dusk, the door swinging open as he entered with 2 snow-covered rabbits in hand. Maribel didn't turn. "I know who she was," she said softly. Elias froze in place. "What?" "Your sister, Ruth." He stepped forward, slowly. "How?" "I met her once," Maribel said, holding up the charm. "I was maybe 9. She came with the mining supply wagon. She had this. She said her mama made it. I never forgot." Elias set the rabbits down, eyes shadowed. Maribel continued, voice shaking. "I heard her scream one night. I didn't know it was her, not then, but I remember the man who was dragging her behind the stables. He had a crooked lip, a long scar across his cheek." Elias didn't move. His breath slowed to almost nothing. Maribel whispered, "That scar. Hank has it." "Elias." Silence fell like snow. Elias's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, "He killed her." It wasn't a question. It was truth given breath. Maribel swallowed. "I'm sorry I didn't know then." Elias shook his head. You were a child. It's not on you. The fire crackled. He hurt you, he said after a moment. Maribel nodded. And now I know why every time I looked at him, something burned. Neither spoke again for a long while. Eventually, Elias moved to the fire, skin pale beneath his beard. We can't keep hiding, he said. Maribel's eyes lifted to his. He'll come. Elias nodded. Let him. She stepped toward him, slowly, holding out the charm. You should take this, she said. Elias's fingers brushed hers as he took it. His voice broke. She always carried it, said it was for protection. Maribel's voice was quiet, steady. Maybe now, it will be. The cabin, the snow, the mountains, they were no longer shelter. They were a stage. Hank would come, and when he did, justice would have to follow. The forest was silent, too silent. Elias paced the edge of the tree line, his instincts on fire. The wind had shifted. Something was wrong. Maribel sat by the small fire inside the cabin, watching him with wide, unreadable eyes. The embers lit her face with a nervous glow. I'm going down there, she said finally, rising. Elias turned sharply. No, you're not. You can't protect me forever. His jaw tightened. You're not going anywhere near that town. Or him. He won't stop until he finds me, she whispered. But maybe if I go to him, it'll end. It'll end with you in chains again, or worse, Elias growled. I'm not letting that happen. She met his eyes for a long, painful moment. What if it's the only way to protect you? He shook his head and turned away, furious and afraid. But he didn't see her slip away at dawn. The cabin was empty when he returned with water. Her scarf was gone, so was one of the horses. Damn it, Maribel, he hissed under his breath, heart slamming against his ribs. He followed her tracks until they disappeared in a patch of churned mud near the ridge, and there, lying in the dirt, was her scarf. Bright red, too perfectly placed. He didn't hesitate. Elias dismounted, lifted the scarf, and the trap snapped. 3 men burst from the trees behind him, tackling him to the ground. He fought like a man possessed, landing a punch that shattered one man's nose, driving his elbow into another's gut. But the third came from behind and slammed a rifle butt into the back of his skull. The world spun. Everything went dark. When Elias opened his eyes again, his wrists were bound, his head pounding. Blood had dried along his temple. He was on his knees in the center of Dry Gulch's jailhouse, a ring of men surrounding him, Hank Tolliver at the center. Well, well, Hank drawled, spitting near Elias's feet. The mountain mutt thought he could play hero. Looks like he forgot who runs this town. Elias lifted his head. Where is she? You'll see soon enough, Hank smirked. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed off the wooden walls of the square. Maribel had been dragged back under cover of dark. She now stood with her hands bound again, a fresh length of rope tied from her wrists to the saddle of Hank's horse. A crowd was forming. She came to me, Hank announced, grinning like a wolf, begged me to forgive her. But some women need to be taught their place. From the jailhouse window, Elias saw her. Her hair was loose, face pale, but her chin was lifted. Maribel saw him through the bars, and her eyes widened in horror. No, she breathed. What did you do to him? Hank yanked the rope, forcing her forward. I'm going to show the whole town what happens to a woman who disobeys. Elias struggled against the ropes, digging into his wrists. You don't have to do this. But Hank only laughed. Oh, I want to. He slammed the jail door shut behind him, leaving Elias in darkness once more. From outside, the crowd stirred. Whispers turned to shouts, and above it all, the sound of Hank's boots hitting the wooden steps echoed like thunder. Maribel stood in the square once more, the rope pulling tight against her hands, the crowd circling like vultures. Inside the cell, Elias dropped to his knees and stared at the loose floorboard near the wall. He remembered it from years ago. His sister had pointed it out once during a supply run. His fingers, bruised and bloodied, clawed at the corner until it splintered. Behind the board, a rusted nail, long and sharp. He gripped it between his teeth and twisted, cutting at the rope binding his hands. Outside, Hank climbed into the saddle, grinning down at his wife. "You should have stayed in the cabin where you belonged," he said. And then the horse reared. The rope pulled tight. Maribel stumbled forward. Elias's rope snapped. He rose, breath ragged. He wasn't going to be too late. Not again. The sun sat low over Dry Gulch, casting long shadows across the dust-laced town square. The same place where humiliation had once been spectacle now bristled with silent anticipation. A crowd gathered, faces tight with curiosity and dread. Children clung to skirts, men leaned on posts, and women watched with clenched jaws. At the center stood Hank Tolliver, holding a fresh length of rope coiled in his fist. His voice echoed like a whip crack. "We finish what was started." Maribel stood trembling, wrists bound once more, her hair tangled, lips split. The rope tied to the saddle horn of Hank's restless horse stretched taut between them. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for mercy but finding only avoidance. No one stepped forward. Hank raised his hand. "This is what happens to women who forget their place." Then, a low, distant rumble. It wasn't thunder. Not this time. Down in the jail, Elias Thorne bled from both palms, fingers raw, as he worked a rusted nail into the wooden hinge of the iron cuff around his wrist. His breath was steady, jaw clenched, mind set. When the lock finally gave with a pop, he didn't pause. He wrapped his hands, burned and bruised, in his coat sleeves, picked the second lock, and stormed out through the back door of the jailhouse like a mountain wind let loose. Back in the square, the horse reared. Hank cracked the reins. The animal lunged forward, and the rope yanked tight. Maribel cried out, her knees scraping the ground as she was dragged across the coarse dirt. Gasps tore through the crowd. Dust clouded the air, and with it, the sound of thunder grew louder, not skyborne, but hoofborne. From the alley between the saloon and the post office, Elias emerged, his coat flaring like wings, axe gripped in both hands. He ran with the force of a falling tree, straight toward the galloping horse. And just as Maribel was about to be whipped into the well's stone edge, Elias leapt. One swing. The axe came down. The rope snapped. The horse stumbled and reared. The crowd screamed. Maribel collapsed onto her side, coughing and bloodied but no longer dragged. Hank turned, startled. Elias stood over Maribel, axe still in hand, shoulders heaving. His eyes were locked, not on the crowd, but on Hank. "You try that again," Elias said, voice low, "and you'll leave this square in a box." Hank spat, drawing his pistol. "She's my wife. You've got no right." Elias stepped forward, shielding Maribel with his body. "No man has the right to treat a woman like that. Not you. Not anyone." The town stilled. Maribel, on her knees, found her voice. It cracked but carried. "He did worse," she shouted. "Hank Tolliver. He's the one who hurt your sister, Elias, years ago. The girl they found by the river. It was him." Gasps rippled through the air like lightning on dry plains. Hank flinched, but his smirk didn't fade. "She lied," he growled. "That girl, she wanted it." "You killed her," Elias said, stepping forward. "She was 16. A woman from the crowd stepped into the open. Sarah Nettle. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I saw him. Years ago. I was afraid to speak, but I saw." The last thread holding Hank's pride snapped. With a roar, he lunged, not with his gun, but a knife pulled from his boot. He charged Elias, blade flashing. Elias dodged the first swing, blocked the second. The knife sliced his arm, but he didn't falter. He threw his shoulder into Hank's chest, driving them both to the ground. The fight was brutal, fists and elbows, dirt and blood. Hank was strong, but Elias fought with something deeper, a fury born of grief, of injustice long buried. With a final heave, Elias pinned Hank down, ripped the blade from his grasp, and slammed his fist into the man's jaw. Hank went still. Silence fell. Dust floated through the air, and the town square, for the first time in years, felt clean. Elias stood, chest rising and falling. Behind him, Maribel reached shakily for his arm, not for rescue, but to steady him. The townsfolk stared, not at her in pity, but at him with awe. Justice, at long last, had stepped into the square. The town of Dry Gulch did not change overnight, but that day, the silence finally broke. In the hours after the fight, townsfolk lingered around the square in uneasy clusters. No one cheered, no one celebrated. They simply stood, watching as the dust settled and the mountain man, bloodied and breathless, helped a woman they had once watched be dragged like a broken thing. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Others nodded in solemn apology. Sarah Nettle approached Maribel first, tears streaking her face. "I should have spoken years ago," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Maribel's voice was hoarse. "You did today. That's what matters." Old Mr. Kemp, the blacksmith, removed his hat as Elias passed. "Never thought I'd see the day a man from the mountain had more honor than the ones down here." Elias didn't respond. He only looked at Maribel, and she nodded. It was time. They packed little. A blanket, some dry bread, the silver pendant Elias had retrieved from his sister's old coat, a canteen of water. The town offered more, but Elias declined most of it. Dry Gulch had already taken enough. Maribel didn't say goodbye to anyone else. There was nothing left for her in that place, not love, not safety, not even memory. They rode out just as the sky began to blush with sunset. No one stopped them. 2 days later, after riding through narrow switchbacks and dense pine, they reached the ridgeline above the valley. There, the land opened wide and wild, and a silver river snaked below like a thread pulled loose from heaven. Elias dismounted first, tying his horse to a stump. He offered a hand to Maribel as she climbed down, and she took it, the cold wind catching her coat. They stood together in the open air, the whole world quiet but for the rustle of leaves and the sound of their breath. Maribel wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from everything still lodged inside her. Then she felt it, his hand, brushing lightly against hers. He didn't take it. He let it rest there, waiting. She looked up at him, searching. His voice came low, rough, but soft with meaning. "If you walk these mountains with me, you will never be dragged again." A beat passed, a breath, then she placed her hand in his. "Then here is where I begin." They didn't kiss. There was no embrace, only the silence of understanding and the weight of what they'd both survived. Together, they took their first steps toward the cabin in the trees, away from judgment, away from cruelty. One step, then another. No promises beyond what was real, no vows carved in stone, just a hand held in peace. In strength, in choice. The sun slipped lower, painting the horizon in gold, and as they walked into the dusk, their shadows stretched long behind them. Two people no longer running, only walking forward, together, and somewhere far below, the silver river whispered its quiet blessing. And that was the story of a woman broken by cruelty, and the mountain man who reminded her she was never meant to crawl. If this tale of quiet bravery, fierce love, and redemption beneath a silver sky moved your heart, hit that hype button. Let the echo of their footsteps reach more souls who need a reminder that dignity is worth fighting for. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where every frontier tale is soaked in grit, grace, and the kind of love that rises from the dust stronger than ever. We'll see you down the trail for the next one.